Okay, can everyone see that countdown?
And video on or off?
On, all times, leave on, leave video on. So 30 seconds to go. Hello and welcome everyone to this special event hosted by Green Left. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathering on Aboriginal land, and I want to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. We're on stolen land. Sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. My name is Susan Price. I am one of the editors of Green Left and I'll be your host today. I'm on Burramatagal land in the Darug Nation in Western Sydney. I'd like to welcome our special guest today, Bruce Pascoe, author of the groundbreaking book Dark Emu and Young Dark Emu. Really warm welcome to you, Bruce. Also participating today are RFS volunteer and filmmaker Robin Murphy from the south coast of New South Wales, agroecologist Alan Broughton from Victoria, and Socialist Alliance local councillor for the City of Moreland, Sue Bolton. Welcome, Robin, Alan and Sue. Well, I think without further delay, we'll kick things off because there's a lot to discuss. And Bruce, I'd like to direct a question to you first of all. Your groundbreaking book, Dark Emu, opened the door to complex and layered social economy, technologies and culture that's been built by First Nations people prior to English invasion. And one of the technologies explored in the book is the use of fire to manage the land. Well, last year's devastating Black Summer bushfires, of which many of us have had direct experience, left us traumatised as a nation and grieving for the loss of lives and habitat, both human and non-human. So Bruce, I'd like to ask you, what can First Nations technology and land practices teach us about how to prevent such catastrophic fires?
Well, it's a good time to ask the question. I travelled with my son up to Cathcart today from Malakuta. We took a round trip through Bombala, through Cathcart, down to Pambula and home. I drove through burnt forest almost the whole way. That's a really large area of southeastern Australia, and we can't afford that kind of waste or threat to our lives or the lives of animals and plants. Most of what we drove through was forest land for the production of wood pulp, and that industry needs a tree of a certain size, and so they are crowded together on every hectare. The crowns of their trees are touched together, and it makes an incredibly explosive mix during a fire. And I witnessed fire in that type of coup. They were the hottest fires I'd ever seen. You know, they did travel through National Park as well, obviously, and through private land, but it was the quantity of trees per acre that was the problem. And the problem has been created because Australians seem satisfied with any kind of forest. Any kind of forest is, you know, often labelled pristine. Nothing like pristine about them. They've been logged many times, and as distinct from the production of saw logs, wood pulp production is incredibly wasteful, you know, because we then export the pulp to Japan and re-import it as hamburger wrappers, and we need to call this industry to account. But as you know, but we don't just condemn it out of hand. We say this is time for change. We don't want people to lose jobs, and we can point out that you know what has cost jobs in the forestry industry is not the greens, it's the mechanisation of forest work. When I was here at Malakuta in the 70s, there'd be nothing to see 20 people in the forest working on timber production. Now, when you go there, you often see one person with two gigantic machines, and he goes from one to the other as he cuts through the forest as if it was a celery crop. And we need to go back to the kind of forest that Australian explorers and so-called pioneers saw in the 1800s, which was a forest where there were 10 trees to the acre. They were massive trees, and those trees were too big to burn. They allowed sunlight into the forest, and now that we've had that experience, the forest we're looking at here now is a more open forest, but it is doomed to become a crowded little coppice forest in the next 12 months because there's so much regrowth happening. And, you know, we can have regrowth, it's got to be, but we've got to look at quality of regrowth. This is all wattle and tea tree saplings coming up. And they're very, very flammable at the size they are now. The forest floor here, which people have been saying will never burn for 10 years, it'll probably burn again this year because of those small trees when they dry out, and some of them are going to die through lack of water. We need to design our forest as Aboriginal people designed that forest for millennia, and that is with large trees under which food was grown. And we can actually see this system in place in parts now that the fire has gone through. And if the forest was big enough, those big trees didn't burn at all. But what's coming up below them now, because the understory has been burnt, is we're getting grasses and tubers and orchids and lilies. And these are Aboriginal foods. These are the foods that we're trying to grow on the farm to demonstrate to Australians that we can have our food and have our forests at the same time. And we can have Aboriginal involvement in the production of these things. It's not the two things aren't opposed. So we have to have really good science. We have to accept that what Aboriginal people had done was good science and had been done over a period of 120,000 years. And so there was plenty of time for mistakes to be fixed. And when the forestry industry starts talking about jobs and production, then we must argue with them politely that we'll always have timber, but we'll use it really well and we'll value add to it, and we'll have more people working in the forest in the future than we've got now. We mustn't let remote timber communities think that they won't have jobs. We must get in there before the government and say, we'll have a different forest. There will be more jobs. Have you got a mate who wants a job now? Because it's very labour intensive, the kind of forest that we're talking about. And timber is going to cost more. It has to cost more, just like water has to cost more, because there are so many more of us that the division of water and timber and food across an ever-increasing population means that we can't afford to have as much as we had before. So we either cut back our population, which is a different argument, over a period of time, but at the same time, we can change our production techniques and methods. And instead of going for this incredibly wasteful clear felling operation that is happening in Australia at the moment, we really put time into advertising our timber to the world, but more particularly using our own timber at home instead of, a continent with forests importing timber. An 8-year-old child could point out to you the irony of that, like an 8-year-old child pointing out the irony of a country with the best water in the world, which Melbourne was supposed to have had in the 1980s and 1990s. A country like that importing water from France and Italy.
Robin Murphy, I'd like to bring you into this conversation as a RFS volunteer on the South Coast and someone who's passionate about sustainable agriculture. How much of a wake-up call were last summer's bushfires, particularly in regard to climate change and resourcing of firefighting in this country?
Well, I think everybody knows now it was this last black summer was the hottest and driest summer that's ever been recorded. The figures are a little bit changing a little bit, 20 million hectares, 3,000 houses gone, 34 people dead, 3 billion animals lost, and in terms of just extinction, people, there's still work being done on just the huge impact of this fire. We knew it was coming. Governments were warned up to 5 years ago of this. Personally, I think one of the first fires I attended, I attended a fire in winter, in the middle of winter, in state forest area. I thought what Bruce has been talking about forestry is really interesting, really very important for us all to consider. But I think when I was on a task force down the bottom of Pigeon House Mountain, I did forget to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Walbunga clan of the Yuin Nation where I am, on the far south coast of New South Wales, and it always has been and always will be Aboriginal land. I apologise for that. But I was down at the bottom of Pigeon House Mountain, and I think when I saw rainforest burning, I think that was the point where I pretty much fear now whether we will ever be able to return to some of the unique old forest bushland that has disappeared. I think also the rate of the fire, the velocity of the fire, everything about this fire was an indication of the longer term effects of climate change, of lack of rain, drought, the dryness of the soil, everything about it. People in my community and within the Rural Fire Service, ongoing debates about, we didn't do enough backburning, we've just got to do more backburning, you've just got to burn the shit out of everywhere. But what I did see was the backburning that was done by the RFS and the containment lines that were done by the RFS and other services working with us made absolutely no difference to this fire. And the other aspect of this fire, of course, being the huge fire it was up and down the whole East Coast, was that it's added to our CO2 emissions and compounded the issue we have. So we've had a royal commission. I think most of the findings are very much in the bureaucratic upper echelons of the superstructures of having a national air quality monitoring system and a national forecasting a smoke system. But it did acknowledge climate change, and one of the things it did say was that it is encouraging governments to engage further with traditional owners. And I mean, because of COVID, our particular RFS in Nelligan hasn't had any opportunity to start working with local Aboriginal councils. Certainly, we believe that cool burning, from what we know, and it's very little, and that's why I think it is really important to work together to learn about how we can better look after country. But I think the other challenge that we've got is that we have to talk to communities. We have to go back to grassroots community, talking to people about all of the issues related to climate change and fires and managing, looking after country as well. I mean, we've got people, I think most of you would have probably heard of the Paul Parker from Nelligan RFS who told Scumbo to go and get fucked. You know, I mean, he represents parts of the community are totally disheartened with both Labor and Liberal, or his solutions to go to Pauline Hanson. But I think no matter what, we just have to go back to communities. I think that's the way to do it. But having said that, and listening to Bruce, I would say, you know, like there is a lot of work. I think that, yes, the bush is too dense in the areas that burnt. I mean, you know, like I forgot the numbers, Bruce, that you talked about in terms of so many trees per hectare, but I think that's a fantastic guideline to actually allow us to see through and grow things on the ground rather than just, you know, plodding through massive undergrowth and trees so close together that the canopy just went whoosh right through. There was just no stopping it, you know. So yes, I'd be interested in, I don't know how forestry gets engaged in these sort of things, but also national parks. So what you're looking at too is that leading up to these fires, there were resources were cut in forestry and national parks. So a lot of the management that they may have put into action was impossible because of those government cuts. So, you know, it's a political fight. It's a fight on a number of different levels, trying to get communities to come back to actually taking some more responsibility about our land, about our country.
Thanks, Robin. For those of you who might not know, Robin actually made it onto national television calling on Scott Morrison to stand down in one very viral piece of video that went around the country and around the world. And I think not a lot of people on the east coast of Australia have forgotten the fact that Morrison was in Hawaii at the time that the fire started. And yes, that was a pretty, I think, important moment of reckoning for the federal government at that time. Bruce, would you like to add to Robin's comments, given, I mean, your first-hand experience of the summer bushfires?
Yeah, as Robin was saying, that you know, those fires were incredibly hot. I've never seen hotter fires, and I've been lived in the country all my life fighting fires for a long time, and these fires were different. Obviously, you know, climate change had created a hotter planet, and a hotter, drier planet. You know, an 8-year-old child will tell you that that's going to make for a hotter fire. we do have to look at the Aboriginal experience. And when we were travelling today, you know, I've been saying there's 330 trees to the acre. That's what I counted down in between Eden and Malakuta in one of the coops. But we passed a forest today, and my son said there's 1,000 trees there. They're just like sticks, you know, and because a lot of Australians don't engage with the forest, we are letting this kind of forest design take over our will, and we have to engage with it, and we have to, but we have to engage with it in a way where we're talking respectfully to the opposition, and particularly to the workers. We don't want to insult the rights of those people who make their living out of the forest, that we don't care about their job. We do care about their job. We care about their families. We care about the school that is sustained by their children going there. We care about the cricket team and the football team and the netball team that is sustained by those forest workers. And we have to have that conversation about what the forest might look like, what we might grow in it, what food it might produce for us, and how we might do that as a community. And I'm very keen for us to change our diet, to look at getting our food from plants that are perennial. And you know, it's not an issue that is clear cut. I would like to see more grassland. I'd like to see that grassland as perennial, because the perennial grassland sequesters carbon, but I want that grassland burnt, and that releases carbon. But the impact of grassland fire as against the fire in a forest like we have, carbon release for the grassland is minuscule in comparison to the forest. And the other thing is, when do we burn? You know, in this district here, we've known the Aboriginal formula for 250 years. And the Aboriginal people in this district were so anxious about the kind of forest that was developing that they told the perpetrator of most of the massacres in this district how to burn. They pleaded with him to burn in a particular way. This is the person that had massacred their families. And that was the level of their concern about the forest that was developing. And that formula, which is a mathematical formula, was to not burn until the north wind had turned around to the west. We're talking about mid-autumn, and that we have 3 dews in a row, not 2, but 3 dews in a row. That is when you start to burn, and you burn at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. These aren't hard rules to follow. It's an algebraic equation, and it's not hard for us to develop it. But also the thing is, we have to commit to it for 70 years. What we're trying to do now, we're trying to catch up. So we want to do these controlled burns. Those controlled burns are hot in themselves. We need to cool them down. We need to have more of them. Each of them needs to be smaller, and that requires people. So this is where we need to engage with government and communities and say, we all need to do more work in the forest. We need to become more familiar with our forest. We need people on the ground burning the forest in a particular way and doing it very safely. So we need to have a public advertising campaign like Slip, Slop, Slap about encouraging people that this kind of fire protection is going to be good for us. It's got a few rules. Many of those rules are Aboriginal, and this, instead of splitting our communities apart, we can bring them together. We can embrace the community, and the community can embrace a green movement. And we should get rid of these distinctions. We should get rid of the, you know, and this is the long term I'm talking, we should get rid of the term green, we should get rid of the term left, we should get rid of the term right, and we should say that we, the people, are the true conservatives. We're the real conservatives. You, Scotty Morrison, and you know, people like that, you are the radicals. You're the uncontrolled force in our society, and we are going to bring you to heel. We, the people, have more sense than you, and we, the people, have gone to the scientists and the foresters, and we've sought information, and we, the people, want a safer forest, and we, the people, will buy those forest products. I'm building a few things here on the farm at the moment. One, to replace what we lost during the fires, so we're using our own timber, and in the others we're using commercial timber. But that timber, I think, is too cheap. We should be making our houses to last. We should make our furniture to last. Our outdoor furniture should not be a throwaway item every summer, like those plastic chairs. We should be building lightweight timber chairs that last 3 or 4 generations, like things used to. And we, you know, if we can export these to the world, we will. But if Australians just made chairs for themselves, our forest would be productive. We have to, you know, I think population growth is something that we have to embrace, but also exponential growth is ridiculous because we can't afford it. The world cannot afford a population explosion it has. The world cannot afford exponential growth. The Murray-Darling Basin is telling us that. Pollution of our cities is telling us that we've reached our limit in terms of growth. We now have to have an economy that relies on stability rather than growth. We should be introducing new words into the economic debate, words like stability. You know, if they don't like sustainability, then we'll call it stability. And we have to take charge of the vocabulary. We also have to take charge of the mood, and we have to take the people with us rather than being oppositional. You know, that protest of the left in the Galilee Basin in the last federal election is indicative of the fact that we hadn't talked to those people until 3 weeks before the election, and they weren't in a position to listen, and we weren't in a position to open the argument with them. We have to talk about protecting their families, but the whole scheme that we build, and you know, I have an opinion about how it looks, but we have to devote ourselves to it for 70 years. We have to say to both Liberal and Labor, listen, you guys think in terms of three years. We're thinking in terms of 7 decades. We're going to create a forest that we safe. We're also going to create a forest that we can use and that we can grow our food in. You know, when people pull down an old house to build a new house now, they burn all the structural timber. Very little of it is saved again because it's quicker to build with new timber. Because if with old timber, you've got to denail it, you've got a few notches in it. But we can legislate for the fact that people reusing old timber gain a benefit. Because by them using old timber, we all gain a benefit. And the community benefits. And we have to talk to a community like this. We have to respect the community. If you grow up a population that is used to buying plastic toys for their kids that break within 6 weeks, and are then thrown down the tip, then you can expect those children of the broken toy to also tolerate a broken house. You know, a cheap disposable house, a cheap disposable chair, disposable everything. We have to get to those children and make them the agents of change. And I think they are. I think they want to be. We've seen that in all our, the way our school children have protested about climate change. That these are people who are going to be agents of change. And, you know, we're not, you know, when I was a student, people were talking about when the revolution comes and who'll be first up against the wall. Well, what a disgusting thing to think about. The first person up against a wall. That is just perpetuating violence. That is perpetuating division. And, you know, the very far left, of which I was a member in those years, kind of disgusted me that we would talk about other people in that way, as if we could do a Pol Pot and get rid of the people who annoyed us and everything would be sweet. If we had done a Pol Pot, as was suggested in those times, we would have been left with the perpetrators of violence. You know, we have to be gentler, we have to be more considerate, we have to be far less violent in both voice and deed. And we have to do it for 70 years if we want a better country. And we have to convince politicians.
Thanks, Bruce.
That we, the people, are going to insist on it.
I think we'll have an opportunity to hear from you a bit more about that, and also Sue Bolton a little later about this whole challenge of building the sort of people's power or community-based empowerment to make the change that's needed. Just wanted to turn the conversation back, I guess, to something you mentioned earlier, and this whole question of food production. And in particular, one of the things I found, I mean, so much I found fascinating about your book, but just discovering history that was not taught at school when I was there, about the level of technologies for, you know, food production, agriculture, fish trapping, that First Nations peoples, you know, used every day. I just wanted to, if we could talk a little bit about the question of food for a while, and whether you feel that First Nations agricultural practices and foods can contribute to the struggle to ward off climate change and to mitigate the effects of a warming planet. And can we feed people sustainably by adopting more of the types of technologies and sustainable food practices of First Nations?
Yeah, I think ploughing is one of the greatest releases of carbon into the atmosphere. And so we have to look at crops that don't want us to plough for them. And these are the perennial grasses, the perennial tubers. We need to establish these food crops as Aboriginal people had them, which are deep-rooted, a large root mass that is accessing water deep in the soil and minerals the same, and so that we don't have to apply masses of water and superphosphate and fertiliser, pesticide and weedicide to them. That will make, just that alone will make an enormous difference. And that, you know, we're not going to do that overnight. Once again, this is a 70-year program. But if we started on our most marginal farms, those farms that are going broke, those farms where every time there's a dry summer, they scream drought, we have to say to our community, Aboriginal people didn't experience drought because they had the right crops. So it's not a drought, it's just the wrong crops. If you're growing the right crops, you wouldn't even notice that there was what you are calling a drought. We have to stop talking about desert in Australia. We have to stop talking about droughts. We have to talk about Australia. She is a dry continent. We are asking too much of her. We cannot treat her as if she's Kent. in England. We have to treat her as herself. We have to respect Mother Earth, and we have to grow the crops that Aboriginal people domesticated for that purpose. They didn't domesticate those crops casually. There was science and thought went into it, because they were crops that were good for the continent, but they were also crops that produce high levels of nutrition. And the nutritional studies that we're doing on some of these plants are showing incredibly high levels of nutrition in them compared to their equivalent, like wheat and peas and beans. Incredibly high levels. The yields per acre are small, but then again, like the rest of the world, Australians could afford to eat less. So if we were less needy and greedy and consumed a little less, each of us consumed a little less, the world would bless us for it, and our continent. So we can grow these foods. We have been harvesting a little salad vegetable, which we call kunjim winyu. We don't do anything to it. It grows on the margins of the saltwater swamps on the property here. It's a delicious salad vegetable. It looks beautiful on the plate. And, you know, a local cafe has been using it during the summer months, during the winter months rather, as a salad vegetable. This is not something that we can produce 12 months of the year because it's a seasonal plant, but it grows in salt. Now, this is a boon plant for Australia. We have to talk to Australians about, you know, the little punnets of salad vegetables that I'm buying from Bunnings and places like that, and loving, planting them and loving them. We can start growing these Australian salad vegetables that aren't water hungry, aren't nutrient hungry, and adapted to the pests in Australia. These changes have to take almost generations. We have to be in it for the long haul. We have to convince people of the nutritional values, but also the flavours and also the environmental benefits. You can hear that my dog is very keen to be part of the conversation, so I'm going to invite him in so that you can meet him. Come in and be quiet. Come on. Yes, very good. Yes, I said that. I told them that. He's saying 70 years. He wants people to commit to a program of change over 70 years. I already said that.
Well, Alan Broughton, we might bring you into this topic. As someone who's active in the agroecological space, what do you think it's going to take for us to move beyond the sort of large-scale, privately owned, you know, factory farming system, but also to ensure that we can still feed the population and maintain our food sovereignty?
Okay, now there's two aspects to agroecology. One is ecology itself, and the other one is the social and political aspects of it. Now, ecological farming is taking place on a larger and larger extent, not just in Australia, but in other parts of the world now. That is, using the principles of ecology in order to produce food. So that is recycling of nutrients, creating biodiversity so pests and diseases are not an issue, and respecting nature. And this is in contrast to the philosophy about nature that has developed up, probably dating right back to the Bible's time, when people were told to go forth and rule over nature. And that's got, that advanced further during the period of colonisation, and it wasn't just suppression of nature, it was also suppression of Indigenous communities around the world. So, yeah, that is changing, and individuals can do that. The other aspects, the social and more political aspects, are an essential part of agroecology. Now, this term was it was established and advanced by an organisation called La Via Campesina, which is a network of 200 million small farmers around the world. And part of the La Via Campesina policies is respect for nature, respect for Indigenous communities, the right for people to produce food in the way that they want to suit their own needs and not be dependent on multinational corporations for inputs and for marketing. It's also against racism and it's also against sexism. So it's a movement that is bringing together people, small farmers around the world. Now, the Australian Indigenous agriculture can be part of this. Growing kangaroo grass as a grain crop requires an ecosystem. And in that ecosystem, in a kangaroo grass ecosystem, there are lots of different food producing plants. There's the chocolate lilies and the early Nancy's and the various different orchids and the yam daisies. So we can create that sort of ecosystem again and make good use of it. So what Bruce is trying to do, it's a bit similar to what the Land Institute in the United States has been trying to do for several decades now, and that is to improve the genetics, not by genetic modification, but just by plant breeding of North American grain crops. So these are perennial grains. Perennial grains don't need to be, you don't need to plough the soil, you don't plant them every year. So developing perennial grains in order to shift the emphasis away from all these soil damaging annual crops that the world is now dependent on. Now that project has been going on for a very long time, and it's got a lot further to run yet in order to do this. So what Bruce is doing, it's the pioneering work from Australia for Australia, doing a similar sort of thing, and the results, I think, in the longer term will be fantastic. Grains are particularly difficult, but those other food producing crops that Bruce was talking about, like the native celery and the native mince, the various different fruits, that is happening now. There are quite a lot of Aboriginal communities that have taken this up as a farming enterprise, quite successful, I think. So that needs to expand a lot too, so that we can get value out of those Indigenous crops that sustain people for countless thousands of years. Now, individuals and small groups can do this sort of thing, but it's still not sufficient in order to achieve the goals of agroecology overall, because we're still going to be dominated by the big corporations which control the inputs for agriculture. They control the research, they control the marketing, they control the processing. So we need to take away the power of those corporations in order to achieve food sovereignty and the full rights of people for to have land and to produce food for the whole community on a sustainable basis, feeding local areas first, and doing it in an ecological way. So yeah, I'm enthusiastic about what Bruce is trying to achieve, and I wish him the best.
Thanks, Alan. Bruce, just before you respond to Alan's comments, we've just had some requests from the audience if you could try and speak as close as you can to your microphone, because some people are having trouble hearing you. Over to you, Bruce.
Well, look, I think the varieties of foods that we can produce without making huge demands on our soil and our water is endless in Australia, because Aboriginal people were growing many more vegetable plants and many more grains than we grow at the moment in Australia and the world. That was an environmental protection, because if a season was good for one, it might be bad for another. So there was a protection in having a profusion of edible plants. Alan was also talking about soil, and we need to build soil, because what's happening at the moment is that Australia is spending Aboriginal capital. The Aboriginal soil building processes is the capital that we have been spending for 250 years in this country. We've been abusing the soil through erosion, allowing the soil to be eroded away. Last summer, I drove through 150 miles of 150 kilometres of sand, of dust. It made the national news at that time. And people tended to throw their hands up in the air as if this was a real surprise. What was happening is that farmers in that district south of Brewarrina were ploughing the land in December for the growing of cotton. And, you know, why are you surprised when there's a cloud of dust above your tractor? Why is anyone surprised that that cloud is picked up by the westerly wind and deposited in Sydney? And we then export it to New Zealand, as if they need any help from us, having the best prime ministers in the world already. Why? This is, you know, where is the scientist on the tractor? Where is the farmer on the tractor while this is happening? We need to build soil, not export it. And we need to build soil through those perennial plant structures. And I'm reading a book now about the little tiny threads of fungi in the soil and how their contact with the roots of other plants is so beneficial. And that is the way you build soil, but also nutrition, because they affect the nutrition of those plants. And yet things like superphosphate, ploughing, weedicides, they kill those things. These things that are built into our soil to protect and build it are being killed by our agricultural processes. So we should have National Soil Day, and it shouldn't be run by a chemical company. It has to be run by a farmer that has been building soil for a long time. You know, Charlie Massey's book, The Cry of the Reed Wall, but Bill Gamage's book, Biggest Estate on Earth. These ideas are telling us directions to go, but also look out for Aboriginal writers and essayists on these problems, because we're getting a generation of young Aboriginal people who not only are educated, but they also devoted to their culture and are listening to their grandparents. Some of the methods that we now use on the farm have been given to us by young female scholars who have gone back to their grandmothers and great-grandmothers and asked questions about food and cooking. And we've incorporated those into our method because they're so important for our health. They're also so important for our country. So there's so much to do, and we need to elect and assist all these young people who are doing these great things. We need them to be encouraged. And you know, in the latest round of ARC grants, you know, I know of half a dozen Aboriginal communities who applied for doing things which I've just been talking about, and all of them were knocked back. You know, and I'm sure the people on those panels weren't being malicious. They were in the belief that there were better research projects going around. But I think we as a community have to talk to our university communities, our research communities, and say, look, it really doesn't matter how many old convict boot buckles you find in an archaeological site. It is very important that those people who want to grow food in a sustainable way are supported. We do have a couple of very good programs being supported by government in perennial grain, and we need more of it because we are looking at harvesting this summer tens of thousands of hectares, not just kangaroo grass, but Maja Naluk, Burul Naluk, and some grains for which we don't have much knowledge. There's three of us. You know, we're not going to be able to cover the ground. You know, our harvester is 3 dustbins welded together, basically. You know, it's a very small thing. And, you know, we're going to need different equipment, more of it, but we need people. We need people to commit to it. And when we say people, we want the government to think, right, we'll recruit, we'll, you know, bring in workers from Asia, we'll, you know, we'll get all the unemployed. Yeah, but Minister, what about Aboriginal people? You know, what about taking those kids who are not doing very well at school and saying to them, we're going to reset your whole education, and for 3 years, you're going to come harvesting with us. We're going to pay you a really good wage. You may or may not meet your new husband and wife to be on the harvesting field, but then you're going to go back to university, and then you will be supporting your family through your intelligence. You will become part of the economy. That's what I want. It's a really important part of it for me. There's all this stuff about nutrition, about environmentalism, about looking after the Australian estate, but there's also this thing about employing the Aboriginal community where I am now, where unemployment is about treble that of the rest of the country. And, you know, it's so easy. You know, we're sending tourists to the moon, you know, to employ Aboriginal people in agriculture, in comparison, is very small.
Well, thanks, Bruce. I think that kind of leads us nicely onto the final topic for this part of the event, and that's around the whole question of Aboriginal rights and Black rights more generally. I mean, the inspirational Black Lives Matter movement, which, you know, has not just been meaning sustained protests in the United States, but has also resulted in some of the largest mobilisations in Australia's history for Black rights and against deaths in custody. One particular one in Sydney that I was fortunate to be part of happened right in the middle of COVID lockdown. And I think certainly this movement, Black Lives Matter, has reminded us of the racist foundations that this country was founded on, the dispossession, theft of land, and enslavement that helped basically build the wealth of our nation and other nations such as the United States. And the fact that that First Nations communities live with racist policing. And I guess what Black Lives Matter has done is to raise the question of policing again to a global civil rights movement. So my question is, how, your comments before about questions of the social outcomes of the sorts of work that you're engaged in. I mean, do you see your work as part of this general Black Lives Matter, Black rights movement today?
Yeah, I do. Anything where Aboriginal people can be considered part of the society and the economy is a very important thing. But the thing we didn't hear from the Black Lives Matter movement was that red lives matter too. And First Nation Americans and Canadians were never talked about in this. I followed the news coverage on it very closely, and I was full of sympathy and pride in the fight on behalf of African Americans, but in none of it did I hear about First Nation American or Canadian people. And Aboriginal people in Australia were a bit cynical about the Black Lives Matter movement because an American gets killed in a horrible way by the police, and the world takes notice. A young woman in Western Australia was allowed to die in a police cell, and not only did not the world know about it, Australia didn't blink. So when we pride ourselves on the Black Lives Matter movement, we have to remind ourselves that Indigenous lives matter, and they matter in America, and they matter in Australia and around the world. And don't accept a simplistic argument that is put by the press to get a slogan happening or a movement happening. This is about people, this is about humans, and about our civil rights as a world. And when we find a new food fad, whatever it is, it's some kind of ancient grain or something like that, and we demand it as a First Nation, how are the people who used to eat that grain getting on? Can they get enough of it? Or are they responding to the fact that we're going to spend a fortune on getting it and adding it to our cereal and making our hair glossier as a result, or whatever the benefit is, and they starve? Is that what we want? These are complex questions, and we have to start at home. We have to say, we're not going to import grains from another country. As a green movement, we're going to refuse to bring shiploads of grain from another country when we've got shiploads already on our soil. And we should be more self-sufficient. I was amazed during COVID that people started talking about making shoes in Australia again, because we were started to worry about our Chinese imports. Yeah, we should have a shoe industry in Australia. We should have a shirt industry in Australia. We should be making those things, and we shouldn't be making our consumer choices on the fact that a Chinese shirt at the moment costs $12 and an Australian shirt of the same type costs $40, and refusing to buy the Australian one, because in 20 years' time, the Chinese shirt that costs $12 will cost $40, because those people, their wages are going to go up. So choosing to buy cheap goods is supporting slavery. And, Australia prided itself on being the home we need to think about our consumer choices in that way, and not accept slogans for change. We need to really think through our processes, and it's complicated. Thinking is hard, and that's why a lot of people don't want to do it, because it's hard. And we should encourage our kids to think. We should encourage them to take pride in their thought. And I was so proud of those kids who protested last year. And we should encourage them and tell them that we're proud of them. When we should also say, we're not always going to agree with you, but we will agree with your right to put your point of view forward. But I've got absolute faith in the 8-year-olds of the world, because their thought processes are very clear, very logical, and we should not treat them like children just because their logic is so pure. We should encourage that purity of logic. We should be childlike for longer in our own lives, and not rush to be craven adults. We should embrace that clarity and purity of thought, and nurture it in the country, because I love the way kids think, and I think there's a lot of hope, as long as we don't quash them, as long as we don't lure them into the consumer and commercial race. And talking about consumerism and commercialism, it's not anti-capitalism, and it's not pro-communism. When sometimes people accuse me of pushing a communist agenda, I said I have no faith in communism, because the communists drained the Aral Sea. There is no benefit in following that kind of line. What we need is humans to be rewarded for egalitarian thought, and it doesn't have to come out of communism or even socialism. It has to come out of a philosophical stance, not a political stance. We have to change the philosophy of our population, and not turn them into politicians. We need more philosophers and fewer politicians.
Thanks, Bruce. On that note, I think we might bring you into this, Sue Bolton. As someone who's a local councillor, a socialist, eco-socialist, you fought alongside residents and communities against racism, to protect cultural heritage, and you've taken on some pretty powerful interests, including property developers, and even had some wins along the way. What do you think are some of the critical components in building strong campaigns by ordinary people today?
Thank you. And I'd like to acknowledge I'm speaking from the land of Wurundjeri Wurrung, and like to respect owners past, present and future. My beginning of this topic is that when you're disconnected from a place and a people, it's easy to make a decision to destroy people's livelihood, their cultural heritage, the environment, and invade and wage war against the people if you're a CEO or a politician or a bureaucrat. And the other reason is vested interests. The politicians and bureaucrats and CEOs would have just seen the Juukan Gorge as something getting in the way of profit. They would have seen the ancient directions tree of the Bunurong people that was destroyed a few months ago as just being getting in the road of a new road. In the latter case, it wasn't so much necessarily the case of the Bunurong trees. It wasn't so much a case of profit, but it was getting in the way of a bureaucratic project being imposed by the government. And the engineers and the politicians were divorced from the meaning of the Bunurong trees, just as the CEOs of were divorced from the meaning of the Jukan Gorge. They just regard these sacred areas as being little black dots on a map, which are meaningless. And of course, racism, class prejudices, and other forms of prejudice is also used to undermine solidarity and further devalue the significance of cultural heritage and the livelihood of oppressed people. Racism is also used to dehumanize people and their cultures, overcome the natural human instinct of solidarity and the natural human instinct of being repulsed by the thought of killing another human being. As individuals, we can't overcome this, but when we join together and act collectively and in solidarity, we can overcome it. That means that to stop these attacks and this destruction, we have to base our campaigns in the community. We have to win the broad community, the mass support, in order to force governments, CEOs, bureaucrats to stop in their tracks. These campaigns need to be broad enough to involve people regardless of whether they're university educated or not. You don't have to have read massive tracts to be concerned about climate change. These need to be movements where it's easy for anyone to be involved. If we just lobby the politicians and bureaucrats, we won't win because they have dehumanized us. They just see us as numbers and statistics. While they get away with this, they can ignore us. Politicians hope they can ride out any opposition. We have to force our way onto the scene. As a local councillor, I've seen many issues over time, bureaucratic decisions which have been made by council officers often, as well as, other things which have been done by state and federal governments and companies. Sometimes the bureaucrats at council level even think they're doing the right thing on the basis of statistics, but the statistics don't tell a whole story. And as a local councillor, it's rarely the case that when I raise an issue on behalf of a community, even a very serious issue like an Agent Orange contaminated site, I rarely win just on the basis of rational argument. There's always a need to force your way through that bureaucratic agenda with a community campaign that's outside of council, where people are speaking with their own voices. I'd like to just finish with a couple of points, sort of illustrating this. And one was a decision to close down an Aboriginal school in Moreland, in Glenroy, in the northern suburbs. It was a decision which was supported by both Liberal and Labor governments when they've been respectively in government, and very much supported by the Education Department, which was committed to mainstreaming and getting rid of any kind of Aboriginal schooling or any other specialist kind of schooling. And there was a campaign by the local Aboriginal school community. And now these weren't the sons and daughters of Aboriginal bureaucrats. These were very much grassroots Aboriginal people who'd never been involved really in political campaigns before. And while we lost that fight to save the school, we then went into another fight after I got elected to council to stop the sell-off of that school site. And the plan is, although we haven't fully won this yet, for a First Nations community hub. And in order for me to win that argument on council, we did have to have a campaign in the local community involving a broader range of people within the Aboriginal community and beyond the community to actually win the council to support the next steps in this project. One thing which I was also taken by, which didn't happen in my council area, happened in another area in Melbourne, which I thought was a really good one. And that was a campaign to have a commemorative marker for two Aboriginal men, Tana Minaway and Mul Bohina, who were executed on the 20th of January, 1842. They were freedom fighters and they were part of the Aboriginal resistance movement against white settlers in the Mornington Peninsula. And I think this was a really important campaign because normally we don't get to hear about the individuals who made up the Aboriginal resistance movement. And I think this was really important. And while that wasn't a massive, massive campaign, it was a group of very dedicated people who tried to bring to life the lives of these freedom fighters who originally brought to what became Melbourne from Tasmania by the Aboriginal protector George Robertson. And I think this was a really good campaign to try and portray these men as resistance fighters. And just the last point I'd like to make is the massive protests initiated in Melbourne by the Warriors of Aboriginal Resistance have had a massive impact in terms of the pride of young Aboriginal people. So over the last few years since Warriors of Aboriginal Resistance have been organising, you see lots of young Aboriginal people turn up in their colours, very proudly identifying with their nations.
Thank you, Sue. Bruce, would you like to respond to anything Sue's raised?
I think community action is the way for us to go. Inclusive community action that assists communities with information, good quality information, and brings in community elements that don't always get an opinion in public debates. And we need to grow that bond between disparate parts of the community so that it does become a community and not just people isolated in the community, you know, grifting away to get a living. That we act as communities, not just in our employment structures and our sporting structures, but in the commercial space as well, where we look after each other. And I think local government is one of the ways we can do that. And local government can apply a lot of pressure to federal and state politics. And you know, that now is a really good time. We need to also support our state politicians who have done a pretty good job, it seems to me, in keeping our communities safe. And our communities have done a terrific job in keeping our communities safe when you look at countries around the world and how they're travelling with the same thing. So these models of behaviour, public behaviour, have to be encouraged, and we have to apply them to other things, you know, and I'd like to see them applied to Aboriginal inclusion, but also agricultural change.
Thanks, Bruce. Now, I just want to I think there's a bit of storm activity going on across Victoria at the moment, so the connection's not particularly strong coming from Bruce at the moment. You're drifting in and out a little bit. So I don't know if it's storming where you are, but I think Sue's also being impacted by it. So apologies to our audience if the sound was coming in and out there during Bruce's last comments. If it's all right with the panel, we do have just time, I think, probably for one question from the audience. I'm sorry, we're likely to run out of time. So just while people who are listening in are having a think about a question, we'll just try and pick one or possibly get to two, but we do have to finish this webinar at 5:30. Just while you're having a quick think, I just remind you that if you haven't already read Bruce's book, Dark Emu, or if you've got a young person in your life, community, family, school who'd appreciate reading Young Dark Emu, please do get a copy of the book. It is available at a Resistance bookshop near you or online at resistancebooks.com.au. And I'd also like to invite everyone who's tuned in today to also become a supporter of Green Left. We'll be celebrating 30 years of publishing next year, quite a milestone for any publication, let alone a small, mainly volunteer-run, supporter-driven, eco-socialist publication. If you would like to support Green Left, you can do that for as little as $5 a month and get a Green Left copy to your inbox each week, or for a little bit more, you can receive it by post to your home or PO box, and you can play your part in helping to make sure that this important eco-socialist media project continues well into the future. So that's my little plug, and we'll just now have a look and see if we've got any questions from our audience. Okay, I have got one here. Like, I've got a few. All right. A lot of questions. Okay. Wow. Okay, there's a lot here. Okay, I might just ask the first one that's come up, which is someone who's asking, Bruce, what your thoughts are on movements such as Extinction Rebellion, who are active in the climate social justice space today.
Yeah, amazing movement of people, and supported by a lot of young people in schools and universities. And you know, we have to look at our human behaviour and how it's affecting the world. It's the same thing that we've been talking about this afternoon, about changing our behaviour, not expecting the world to meet our demands.
Thanks, Bruce. Our next question comes from Paul Springer on Jara Country, who's asking, how can we get the message out in a culturally appropriate way?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
The question was, how can we get the message out about the things we've been talking about today in a way that's culturally appropriate?
I think we have to talk to our children. You know, everything we do has to be long term, and you know, congratulations to Green Left for 30 years of publication. It's a dedication of a sustained dedication, and we have to look at everything like that. Change has to be generational. It can't be a fad piece of politics that another political party can reverse. It has to be imprinted into the philosophy of our children and our nation. So we have to look at slow change.
Thank you. Our next question is from Kate Taylor, and she's asking, what is one of the best actions we could take right now?
Eat less.
Do you want to just try again, Bruce? Sorry, that didn't come through.
Ate less and demanded more, and did the little things, you know, like the, might sound trivial, but the keep cup, and refuse to take away plastic containers full of food, and to recycle better. If we can do those little things at the same time as we're campaigning for the bigger things, I think it's really important. And once again, the 8-year-olds are driving this campaign. They're the ones who are policing the recycling my house, and we need to allow those kids to have their way, and to encourage their activism.
Our next question is from Tim Reed, and Tim's curious to hear more about the place of the kangaroo in Indigenous perennial plant-based systems.
It's a really important question. Australian farmers are grazing kangaroos. They're feeding kangaroos on the grass on the property. But we then turn our gaze from the kangaroo to the Hereford and the sheep. And so we're grazing 3 animals and eating 2 of them. Those hard-hoofed animals, you know, the sheep has ridden on Australia's back for 250 years and damn near destroyed our soil. It's the wrong animal for this country, very destructive animal. We need to start looking at harvesting the flesh of Australian animals because they're very low in fat. They eat the herbage of Australia and thrive on it. They don't demand a lot of water because their whole metabolism is designed to be economical with water consumption, like anything in Australia has to be. So I think we need to eat kangaroos, but we need to eat less meat. We need to be really economical about the way we eat meat. And, my generation is the generation that has to be involved in that change. Very hard to change behaviour at my age, but we need to show a bit of leadership to our kids and grandkids that we will consume less. As a first level economic nation, we have to take leadership and say we are going to make less demands on the earth, and we will therefore make more opportunity for other people to share in the wealth. That's a very hard question, but we can also do it in such a way that it's a celebration rather than a petrification. And these things need to be explained, and they can't become slogans that are dispensed with at the next election. They have to become the kind of life belief that is the foundation of your growth, that you believe in them so strongly that they become like thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. That every human believes in them and believes in the sanctity of the generosity that they require.
And Lewis is asking, how do we better involve and work with Aboriginal people when they're so marginalised?
Well, I hear the boast from Australia so many times that non-Aboriginal people have never met an Aboriginal person. This is a disgraceful thing to say. Also a disgraceful thing to have happened, and it's because of how Australia is so fixated by colonialism that we sometimes don't even see how racist our institutions are. And I get asked this all the time, how should we build the bridges between with Aboriginal people? Well, the best place is to start with a teapot and to share a cup of tea with an Aboriginal person. And if you do that, you'll end up sharing ideas. But don't just latch onto the first Aboriginal person you meet and expect them to explain the whole cosmos to you about Aboriginal philosophy. And don't use Aboriginal people as tick a box. now I've made an Aboriginal friend, that sort of thing. It has to be, this person is part of my community and I know their story. That would make an incredible difference in Australia. If the whole community recognised the Aboriginal nation and treated Aboriginal people as part of the community, the intervention in the Northern Territory would never have happened. And we would not be having media silence when Aboriginal people are having medicine withheld from them when they're sick in jail. And, you know, there's so many cases of people dying in jail, Aboriginal people dying in jail for want of medicine, because there's this underlying level of racism, this underlying level of a refusal to care. So I don't want people coming up to me and saying, I've never met an Aboriginal person. I would like people to solve that for themselves.
Thank you, Bruce. And I think on that note, that brings us to the end of our time for questions, and apologies to those of you who didn't have your question answered. We tried to get through as many as we could. But I would like to take the opportunity once again to really thank very sincerely Bruce Pascoe for joining us today, and also to thank our discussants, Robin Murphy, Alan Broughton and Sue Bolton. Hopefully all of you have found it to be an interesting exchange of views and conversation this afternoon. I certainly have, and I wish we had more time to go down the various paths that we've gone down in talking today, but hopefully there'll be future opportunities for us to do that. And we hope to see you at our next event, and please do visit the Green Left website if you're not familiar with it. The YouTube from this event will be available for those who missed it. And for those of you who'd like to watch it again. And stay safe and enjoy the holiday season, and all the best to you, Bruce, with your continuing work, and we'll stay in touch. Thanks again, everyone.